Here we go. We got Eric Scopel checking in from 247 Sports Ducks territory. Eric, how you doing?
Hey guys, how we doing?
Doing good.
Appreciate you being here, man.
Yeah. First thing in the morning for me, I've got my morning tea.
Yeah,
Waking up with you guys.
it's a bit early with you, but yeah, thanks for answering the call. So we're going to dive right into Oregon. I saw the game against Michigan State. It's like somebody told this team that maybe the calendar was off, that week 3 was week 1 or something, that they woke up after those first 2. What's been the difference?
Well, I think they played a lot cleaner. And I think that the hard thing in this era of Oregon football, where they're so reliant on portal players, is to expect this team to be at full capacity right away. And I think that's because I'm somebody who was very high on this team, thought this team had a chance to win every game on its regular season schedule. I still kind of think that's true outside of this weekend. I think Oregon is a pretty favorable situation against most of those teams, but right out of the gate, there were a lot of issues. And they started offensively on the offensive line, where they were kind of forced to restructure what they were doing. They'd had a 5-all offseason, and then unfortunately, the guy that was supposed to be the right guard kind of messed his knee up last week of fall camp. They put a walk-on at center, moved the guy that they were going to put at center at right guard. That just didn't work out. The center wasn't very reliable. The guy at right guard, it turned out, probably should have been the guy at center. Now he is. And I think once they've figured out the offensive line, that helps some things. I think, defensively, they did a really good job against Idaho, aside from a couple of trick plays that went for explosives. That score probably is a little bit, at least defensively, a little bit, maybe not totally representative of what happened on the field. And Boise State was a weird game, just in a lot of facets. The offense kind of got in its way several times. I thought the defense really struggled with Genty to stop the explosives. It's a weird one, though, too. If you go back and look at it, I think he had 25 carries, 15 he had less than 3 yards. The other 10 went for like 200 yards, because this guy's really explosive, and it's hard to keep a guy like that down. So those 2 games were not very impressive performances. I don't think anybody who follows this team or covers this team came away very impressed. But I think what they've done collectively the last 3 weeks has been really impressive, and I think they've really kind of hit the ground running. Starting in Corvallis, that was a really big game just to kind of get some momentum going into the bye week. Came out of that, and I thought played 2 really very dominant performances against UCLA and Michigan State, which probably kind of what we were talking right before I jumped on, probably don't look as dominant based upon the final score for people who didn't watch the game. But neither of those games were very competitive really at any point at all. So I think the team has been playing better, and we'll see now. We'll talk about a lot of the matchups here, but we'll see now what it looks like when the caliber of competition takes a huge step up. And I think that's my big question going in, is probably for both teams, but the things that have looked like strengths, or at least haven't looked like weaknesses so far, what do they look like when you go up and play elite competition? Because I think for both teams, this will be pretty clearly the best competition and the best quality of player and athlete they've faced all season.
Yeah, for me, when I watch the Michigan State game and I see the 2 interceptions by Dylan Gabriel, I kind of just write that off. I don't know that he actually took Michigan State as seriously as he should have, and I think I don't see that being an issue this week. Like I believe he's going to take Ohio State as seriously as he should. I think maybe he was just a little too lax against Michigan State. What did he have to say about the interceptions there in the red zone, in the end zone?
Yeah, I think. So he's had 3 now in 2 games, which is if they're to me, that becomes trend territory when you see it week to week, and it's not just within one game. And it's interesting because the red zone offense has been great, with the exception of those turnovers. They've scored every time they've been in there, with the exception of those turnovers, and then the kneel down in victory formation at UCLA to close that game. So it's been good, and Dylan hasn't turned the ball over any other part of the field. His first and only interceptions came in the red zone. So he talked about, kind of forcing it there. I think Dan talked about being maybe a little bit late on the decisions. The first interception, he actually had the guy he ended up throwing the ball to, his defender fell down in the end zone, like right off the line. And he probably had a 2 to 3 second window to get the ball there. The defender kind of obstructed his view, I thought. So he kind of threw it late, and the Michigan State defender came off his guy and made a great catch for the turnover. The second one, I think he was also too late. I think he actually had the receiver there if he lets it go soon. I do think we're finding, though, the difference between Dylan and Bo Nix, who obviously ran this offense the last couple of years and ran it better, is sort of arm strength. I thought some of these outbreaking routes, because all three of these interceptions have been on outbreakers, basically the same type of plays. I don't know, and especially two of them, he was running and throwing across his body, running right, throwing left. I just didn't. The zip's not quite what you need it to be. So that was another part of it that he didn't say, but that I would say just about his arm strength. I think, Bo Nix gets a bad rap because he throws underneath a lot at Oregon. Well, that's the offense at Oregon, so it's just what's going to happen. Bo Nix has a much more talented arm than Dylan Gabriel, and I think you've seen that through the course of 5 games.
Yeah, I didn't want to accuse him of having a noodle arm like some of past Ohio State quarterbacks with the noodle arms, but like it did look. Arm strength to me is an issue there, and especially on, as you said, those outbreakers, which is that's a death if it's late.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And you can pin this 2 different ways. You can go, hey, it's a 5th-year quarterback, so I don't know how much you're learning, but it's a good thing you get these out in games that are very winnable, and games that you're dominant, and it's the difference between winning by 3 scores or 5 scores. And it's good to do that. Or is he in his head now a little bit? And if he's a second late, the margin for being late is going to be much, much smaller this week, I think. Of like those, I don't expect there to be a ton of separation, and if there are, the ball he better be anticipating it and hitting hitting those receivers. If he's a little bit late, or if that ball doesn't get to where it needs to go because of the lack of arm strength, that's where you could see there being some problems. And obviously, Oregon in this game probably can't survive 2 red zone interceptions, and probably can't survive turnovers, period.
Well, and I'll eventually let Steve talk. I just one last thing is I just wonder if those turnovers like that and the stressing of you can't allow this to happen. This also you can't allow him to be timid or like, now I'm not going to be as aggressive. So I think that's going to be something to watch as well. If he dials things back, that's also not necessarily what Oregon needs.
Yeah, and I asked him yesterday about specifically kind of what the approach has to be, and he says I have to be smart aggressive is kind of the way he's approaching it. I've got to be smart with where I go for it, but I still have to maintain a level of aggression. And this offense is is very much about timing. I mean, the goal, we've been talking about this all season, is get the ball from the center, get it within 2.5 seconds. Like they want this to be a quick precision pass offense where he knows where he's going, he's deliberate, he throws it, and if there's that, kind of mitigates some of the pressure, obviously mitigates him overthinking things and maybe forcing it. But I know those windows are going to be much smaller this week, and there's probably going to be a lot of downs where he holds it longer than 2.5 just because the play isn't where it's supposed to be, or he doesn't feel comfortable letting it go.
Yeah, Eric. I look at these teams. There are a lot of similarities, both big and rugged on offensive and defensive lines. Yep. Both have great wide receiver cores. Oregon has a great running back. Ohio State's got 2 great running backs. Both teams have veteran quarterbacks. They seem to be mirror images of one another. Ohio State's secondary is very good. I've seen some good and some bad out of the Oregon secondary, like Seven Muhammad. He makes a great play and then gives up a touchdown. It just kind of a tough back and forth on that. I think he gave up a long pass to Michigan State and a touchdown against Boise. I want to ask about Lanning. He's in his 3rd year, and Ohio State fans have kind of gone through this with Day as a first-time head coach. Day comes in, kind of trusts everybody that he inherits, and kind of puts his trust in a lot of people. And it took him about 3 or 4 years to realize, though, this is a business and this is cutthroat, and I got to start firing guys and getting people in here who can actually coach. 0-3 against Washington the last 2 years combined. Is there some trepidation with Lanning? Is he ready for this moment? It took Day a while. I mean, he loses to Clemson the first year. Otherwise they go and play LSU and Joe Burrow for that championship. And you don't want to pin it on him, but rookie coaches, new head coaches, there is some learning curve involved. Is he ready to win a big game like this?
Well, I think that's a fair point. And as you point to, the last couple of years, the big one on the schedule, especially last year, the year before, Washington wasn't really seen as a Pac-12 contender until the very end of the season. And even then, I don't think they played for the conference championship. But the last year, certainly, that was the game circled on the schedule. and it was a very anticipated game at Husky Stadium. College game day was there, and I think there are some decisions probably in game that were questionable. We talked a second ago about not maximizing red zone possessions because of turnovers. And that one, it was not maximizing red zone possessions because you didn't kick field goals. You went for it on fourth and got stopped a couple of times in a game that ended up being a 3-point game. So yeah, I think you can be questioning of his acumen in a big game if you want. I think it's really hard to have an answer to that in terms of if he's ready for it or not. I think he is. He seems confident. This program seems really confident with their standing. Of course, that's always the way any program's going to handle itself in terms of just what their messaging is going to be. But I guess we'll have to see on Saturday in terms of really what he's ready for. Now, in terms of the staff he's put together, it sounded like Day maybe inherited. I think one of the benefits to the circumstances Dan stepped into was he built the staff top to bottom from his guys, and he's already been kind of cutthroat in terms of moving on from coaches. He has a very high expectation for what coaches are going to be in this program, and he's already a couple of times now kind of guy. Maybe it was outwardly this is a taking another job, but I think there was probably maybe a conversation or two about not cutting it. So I do think those type of things have already happened, and I don't doubt he's cutthroat enough. But we'll see in terms of this week of where the advantage lies from an X's and O's perspective. I think one of the things with Dan is in these big games they've done a really good job early, and it's just been kind of the in-game adjustments. You think about the way they played Washington in Seattle. That was a game they really probably should have won, and I give credit to Washington for the way they rallied. But there were maybe a couple of moments there with some things that Washington did in the second half that sort of flipped it. So I think those are more the questions I have in terms of Lanning is in-game stuff as opposed to program building, culture building, staff he's kind of constructed, because I do think the staff's is very good, and we'll see how ready they are for the moment. It's a very young staff, I guess, is one thing if you want to look at it a different way. There's a very young staff. I think almost everybody's 35 or younger, a couple of guys under 30. You can probably question if those guys are just collectively ready considering their age.
They gave up 34 to Boise State. This defense has played really well the last couple of weeks, though. Mm-hmm. Who are, everybody knows about the defensive end, Jordan Birch. He's just a freak of nature mm-hmm. out there on the edge at 290 pounds or whatever he is.
Yeah.
Who are the guys that really put, that you can write down their name every Saturday and know that they're going to do their job, I guess?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned Jabbar Muhammad. He's been quite clearly their best corner. I think the Michigan State play you referenced sounds like it was a coverage bust. If you watch it again, I think he was in help as opposed to man on that one, and honestly kind of saved a touchdown. He hasn't been thrown out very much at all this season. I am very curious to see how and again, I think Oregon's going to play a lot of zone in this game. That's kind of been what they've done this year. And looking at the receivers on the outside, I'm gonna guess Will Howard's seen a lot of zone this year based upon the talent they have at receiver. But it will be interesting to see, like, in matchups with Jeremiah Smith, especially for Jabbar, who's like 5'10", 5'11". Mm-hmm. That's a lot of size to give up to a guy who doesn't need size to create mismatches. Just because of the way he can leap and the way he can, obviously the catch radius is crazy. So that's a guy where you could be in great coverage and still give up a ton, and so that'll be an area I'm curious about. But Muhammad's been very solid at corner. Jeffrey Bassa is probably their defensive leader. He dealt with an injury. In fact, he barely played against Boise State. I thought that was kind of an underrated part of the Genty game, was that their best inside linebacker played, I think, 10 snaps because of an ankle injury. He suffered a high ankle sprain in the first series against Idaho. He's back. He's looked really good. That's their defensive leader. It's been interesting, the rotation at linebacker, but Bryce Betcher, who's a walk-on, who's actually a great baseball player, was drafted by the Astros, was I think he was like a gold glove for an outfielder. He's a really, really good baseball player, but he's been their leading tackler. He's played really, really well this year in a kind of a heightened role because of the Bassa injury. So that would be another name to know at linebacker. Defensive line, you mentioned Jordan Birch. That's a great one. I think Derek Harmon, who Ohio State fans probably know from his time at Michigan State, he's been probably their best overall defensive player on this defense to start the season, I would say. Really, really been disruptive on pass downs. I've been really impressed with what he's shown. I thought, at times he's been really dominant and definitely requires a double team. Jamar Caldwell, who plays next to him, another transfer, he's from Houston. Another guy eats up a lot of space. And on the edge, you mentioned Birch, but I think Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti are two true sophomore edge players that they are really high on that have been playing well. I think Mateo in particular on pass downs has been extremely disruptive and you're kind of starting to see why he was such a highly regarded recruit. So those would be the names to know. I really like Brandon Johnson. He's their slot corner. He'll be challenged a lot this week against Ibuka, I think. But he's been really good both in pass coverage and also run support.
Watching the Michigan State game, all of the different fronts, is it a 3-4? Is it a 4-2-5? Does it just depend on whatever Dan Lanning feels like at the moment?
Yeah, they're really multiple there. And I'll be honest, like even getting a straight answer for what is sometimes is hard. But yeah, I would call it a 3-4 with kind of that standing edge guy who you could, if you wanted to, you could call that a 4-man front.
Well, because they list Mateo Uiagalelei as an outside linebacker in the game notes, and it's like, come on, he's
I get into
pounds.
I get in debates about this all the time. I this year, because they listed those guys at outside linebackers, I split my offseason like position breakdowns into outside linebackers and then interior defensive linemen, and not everybody, but some people got very unhappy that I didn't list those guys as defensive ends because they're defensive ends, which they kind of are defensive ends.
But Will Howard talked about he's going to be facing a former teammate in Kobe Savage, a safety.
Right.
And mentioned the 3 new transfers in the secondary that maybe they're still trying to gel there, and there might be something that they can take advantage of. Ohio State can take advantage of their back there. Have you seen any? I think Oregon has only given up like 1 pass of 40 yards or more this year, so they've been pretty good. Like, have you seen any communication issues anywhere?
No, and this was, I kind of alluded to it earlier, like there are going to be things that have been strengths that maybe aren't strengths. Like the reason Oregon didn't beat Washington the last 2 years, if we're just being direct, they weren't good enough at safety and they weren't good enough at corner. I mean, Washington, of course, has a ton of those players are now NFL players along the offensive line, but especially Michael Penix and those receivers who we're seeing in the NFL even now make big plays. And they had a really hard time there. And so that's kind of in the back of my mind is like, if you look at Oregon's secondary on paper, or at least how they grade out statistically, this should be a defensive strength, right? I mean, I think they've, as of, I don't know if it's still the case after the Michigan State game, but going into it, they led the country in passes defended. They were top 6 in opposing quarterback completion percentage, top 10 in opposing quarterback rating, like all of these kind of barometers to measure, like these guys are good, but they haven't faced a quarterback with a pulse. And I thought Aiden Childs was probably the most talented quarterback they'd faced to this point, but all of us have seen him play quarterback and know that's majorly a work in progress. And like the arm talent's there and he'll make some wow throws, but he'll also have a lot of moments where it's just young quarterback growing pains. And so Oregon hasn't faced a quarterback and they haven't faced anywhere near the talented receivers they're playing. So I haven't seen a lot that makes me concerned because, again, the numbers are really good and you just watch the games and you're like, there's not a lot of guys open. Anytime there is a completion, it's almost always been either through traffic or they're playing kind of off coverage intentionally and gave it up. So it's not like it was really on the defenders. But we'll see this week. I'd say that to me is one of the big kind of areas where I'm going like, this could be a strength 11 out of 12 games in the regular season, but this week it could be absolutely something that is susceptible.
So I think you may have answered my question because I thought, okay, it's one thing to walk off the field and think, okay, these were 2 exceptional top 3 to 4 teams in the country. They played their hearts out. There was really not an issue here in terms of anything being exposed, or there were a couple obvious turnovers, but that was a great strip sack or whatever versus, okay, we have an issue or we have 2 issues. So it doesn't sound like on either side of the ball where you saw that at corner and safety against Washington in the last couple of years against capable throwing opponents, where you see anything where you're just hoping that they're able to hide it on either side of the ball.
The interior offensive line is still an area. It would be the other spot that I would actually 2, but there would be that because it's been an issue earlier. And I'll be honest, I think their center is going to be a really good player, but he's a true sophomore. He played guard exclusively growing up. This is a new spot for him. And then both the guards are one is a 3-year starter who I've never thought was like a real plus player, like a good player, capable of being a starting player, but I've never thought he was a star player. And the other guy was a guy that I had in the 2 deep as a backup going into the year, but after the injury we talked about earlier, he's been thrust in there. So I think the center has a chance to be a Sunday player, but he's young, and the other 2 guys aren't Sunday players, is how I would put it. So going against an interior for Ohio State, which has looked really strong, I think at times with Williams and Hamilton, I think that's going to be a challenge and possibly a place where Ohio State can take an advantage. And then the other one, which is kind of low key because everybody's been really high on this receiving core, they're just really not very large on the outside. Like this is not a team where you go, there's a bunch of, like a Jeremiah Smith where you can go, hey, we're just going to kind of go throw it up and he'll make a fun play. Like there's not really any of that in this offense. And when you look at the way Ohio State secondary is constructed and the caliber of coverage athletes out there, I just don't expect there's going to be as many just open targets downfield. And that means you're going to have to make some contested catches. And not that these players aren't capable of it, we haven't really seen it. And the guy you're probably most confident making the contested catches is Evan Stewart, who is probably 5'11". So that would be another area where it hasn't been a problem at all. But when I'm thinking about going against, elite college defensive backs, I'm curious to see how well these guys separate. And then if they aren't able to separate, can they win in contested catch situations, which I'm, again, kind of a little skeptical of based upon what we've seen.
Do you think they're targeting Tez Johnson too much and not getting the outside guys more involved? Or is it just, why not get Tez the ball as much as possible because it's easy and you're going to get 8 to 12 yards out of it and maybe 60?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's a question that the fan base is very, very passionate about because there's a contingent that would agree with the second half of what you said there of Tez is their most dynamic player. He's their most reliable, probably receiver in terms of getting open. And I also mentioned earlier, like the offense is predicated on like quick, easy passes. He's great off the line of scrimmage. He almost always runs to open space. And that's, I think, a huge part of it is if you're going through your progressions and you're going and trying to make it 2.5 seconds, he's a guy who's probably going to be ready a lot of the time. But I also agree, like, I think the lack of Evan Stewart targets the last couple of weeks has been really kind of startling. He had the touchdown against Michigan State, which was great, but I think he has 9 targets the last 2 games. This is a guy you expected to come in and be a lot more involved. And in that same time span, Tez is 28. I mean, it's a huge target share. And so I think there is something to that. I think that's a good question I actually asked Dylan a little bit about, is he kind of force feeding it? And he said, no, I'm trying to go through my progressions, but kind of just said what I just said of Tez is always open. And if he's always open, I'm going to throw the guy the ball. And then to your point, like when he gets the ball, he almost never goes down on first contact. He always makes a couple of guys miss. And sometimes he makes multiple guys and makes it a big explosive out of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it comes down to the plays that are being called. It's up to the offensive coordinator to, if Tez Johnson is the first guy into progression, it's same thing last year with Marvin Harrison. If Marvin Harrison is the first guy into progression, he's generally going to get open. So Kyle McCord's going to look to him. Yeah. It's up to the coordinator to call plays that are like, well, we're going to start over on this side of the progression and bring it over. And if they don't want to do that, then keep throwing it to Tez Johnson and he'll continue to move the chains. I wonder how much downfield stuff there is available. But if the interior is not holding up, then that's also a problem.
Well, and that was my part. My other point was, I think hitting those long explosives, and they've done a little bit of that. I mean, I don't think the explosive rate is as high as it was last year, even close, but they've hit Tez for a long one. They've hit Evan for a couple of long ones. I think Trayshawn's was more a slant that he took for a big gain, but they've been able to kind of every now and then do that. But I do think you're right in terms of the protection, which has been a lot better recently. No sacks the last 3 games, but are they confident expecting those guys to protect for 4 to 6 seconds like that? And the other part is against the secondary, will that lead to, like, is that risk worth it? Or will that lead to him taking a sack because no one downfield's open, or forcing it downfield into a play that's potentially a turnover?
Eric, kind of taking this off the field to the fan and media perspective of this matchup as programs, Historically, obviously, there's no comparison. Even in recent history, Ohio State's an elite and Oregon would be maybe Penn State, Notre Dame type tier. But if you take it to the just here and now, 2023-24, there's little separation, if any. There's no reason for Oregon not to look across the field and just believe that they're equals. And we'll see what happens on Saturday. Does media and do the Oregon fans do they look uphill at Ohio State, or just feel like we're in the Big Ten now, we should own this conference, we should be able to take over, they're an equal, we take them out, and we will continue on our road to what we expect to be, big things nationally?
Well, fans are just by nature irrational, aren't they? I mean, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, and and that's not to say that I think Oregon fans are expecting to just run out of this game with a huge victory. I think Oregon fans are pretty reasonable in terms of, like, the first two games are red flags. And if you look at what Ohio State's done, there's not really an instance of that. Like, Ohio State's winning margins almost 40 points per game, and Oregon's is about half that. So I think there's a recognition that this is a really, really good team they're playing. I also think when you're the number 3 ranked team in the country, and in the offseason, Kirk Herbstreit's picking you to win the national championship, and there's other people who are putting you in those conversations, I think naturally you're going to think you have a chance against anybody, and especially in a home game, because Autzen been such a difficult place for teams to come play. So I think there is optimism. I think it's very cautious optimism amongst most people of, like, they're going to have to play an A+ game. And so far, maybe the best we've seen is a B+. Like, they're going to have to come out and execute for 4 quarters, play clean football, play their best, devise a game plan that minimizes the places where Ohio State can really hurt them, and maximize the places where maybe Ohio State is susceptible. And I think that's a really small list, right? And you asked me kind of like what are some kind of things that maybe Oregon is susceptible? And I mentioned kind of the offensive line and the interior, the size of the receivers. I would also bring up, like, if Dylan Gabriel is going to throw interceptions in the red zone, that's the problem. I mentioned the secondary, is not an area that's been really impacted too much, but could be on Saturday. And I think there are probably a smaller list of things that Buckeyes are worried about, but it's about Oregon being able to find those spots. So, no, I don't think anybody's expecting like a blowout victory. I think that maybe felt like it was potentially possible, like in July or something, when you're looking at these teams and you're thinking about a home game. No one's thinking in those terms, but I do think there's at least confidence they can be very competitive in this game. And they also know that if you win this game, you're in the driver's seat in this conference. So, I think it's irrational in that that's just how fans are. But I haven't seen a lot of like, oh, we're going to clobber them 63-7 or anything like that. But I also haven't seen any like, we don't belong on the field with this team either.
Well, Oregon certainly showed they belonged on the field with Ohio State. They kicked Ohio State's ass 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty emphatic. I know it was like a 7-point game, like 35-28, but it looked and felt a lot worse than that, let me tell you. And yet both programs much different. Obviously, Lanning wasn't the coach then, and Ohio State, brought in Jim Knowles almost as a result of that game alone to be the defensive coordinator. And he's really kind of worked out the kinks, it feels like, for this defense. It's somewhat a bend but don't break defense. They've held people out of the end zone by and large. And then on the other side of the coin, what is the stat, Tony? Is Ohio State 100% in the red zone, with 95% of those being touchdowns and 1 field goal, like 19 touchdowns, 1 field goal in the red zone out of 20 red zones. So that's a good stat. If you can get inside the 20 and know that you're probably going to get points, that's very important in a game like this. But settling for threes, I think, in a game like this isn't going to get it. Do you think this is going to be in the 20s or the 30s? What do you see this at?
Yeah, I was thinking about that last night. Part of me, I don't know. Part of me thinks we just watched Alabama and Georgia a couple weeks ago just have an absolute shootout where the caliber of those offenses really, shine bright, and my point earlier, I think, remains of like, I don't think we really, really know exactly what these teams are because they haven't played each other, or they haven't played anybody close to as talented. And so I think the cream might rise to the top here, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's because of a lot of offensive like just a ton of offense, more offense than we expect, even though I think both teams defensively are seen as maybe that's the strength of their team. So I've kind of gone back and forth. I think it maybe is kind of low 30s, high 20s, which I know isn't hitting either team's scoring average mark. And I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have brought up Georgia, Alabama, but my takeaway watching that game was like, man, these defenses are not equipped to stop these offenses. And I think at times we might be surprised by a little bit of that, but I could be totally wrong. I mean, this game to me is really hard to predict and kind of even analyze, because if you look on paper, it's like, what are we doing with Ohio State? Like they're incredible at everything. And if you look at Oregon, they've been pretty damn good at a lot of things too this year. And so there's not a lot of huge glaring things. And I also say that understanding the caliber of competition has been maybe misleading or hard to really parse through when you get into these games, because I keep coming back to last year with Washington. Like Oregon was so dominant all regular season outside of that game. And I think Ohio State can probably feel similarly about how they played. And then the Michigan game of like these big marquee games, like sometimes you don't know exactly what to expect because they're just different. They almost feel different than every other regular season game.
Was Stewart back? Was he practicing yesterday? Some people are saying he got hurt against Michigan State. Is he okay, or what?
Yeah, he was back. He was back. Yeah, he was back. Yeah. He went back in the game. I think he landed on his side or something, knocked the wind out. He was back.
Took a hard spill. Yeah,
he should be good. I think injury wise, they're as healthy as they can be. They've got about 7 guys that are out for the season or long term injuries, and a couple of those are starting caliber players. But for the most part, I think everybody's is good to go. There's nothing. I don't think anything too new or interesting on the injury front.
You got to be careful making a direct comparison based on just one game. You know, once they've played 5 common opponents, that's one thing. But I thought Oregon played a much cleaner game against. I know that Dylan threw the interceptions, but besides that, I thought they played a more dominant game against Michigan State. So not to bring up old wounds, but you brought up Washington several times. So if it comes down to a last-second kick, their confidence.
New kicker. Or kickers, because they just brought in a guy just came back from injury who hadn't played in 2 years, who might have been the kicker at times last year, and he hit a 50-yarder in his first kick back. And so I think they are going to use both kickers. I don't think there's massive. It's not like they have an automatic guy, put it that way. I mean, Sappington, who has been handling kicks, he's missed 1 field goal this year. He did have a game decider against Boise State, but it was basically a layup kick. You know, it was one of those where they drove it the length of the field, kind of took their time, set it up right where they wanted for him, and he was able to kind of put it through. A year ago against Washington, as you said, Camden Lewis missed one that would have put it into overtime. I think anytime, and I guess Ohio State fans don't know this Oregon program, place kicking has been just terrible historically in big moments. And I still think there's a level of kind of trepidation, a little PTSD of moments, that games that could have, like, I think you would tell Oregon fans would tell you there are 2 or 3 seasons that could have, you know, this is pre even 14 playoff, that maybe Oregon wins a game or 2 that they should have because of a missed kick or 2, and they're playing for a championship or something. But I don't think there's a ton of confidence, I guess, Mark, on that. I think there's a sense of they've been pretty accurate this year. That's great, but when the moment is the moment, again, what shows up, and it's not like they have a guy that's been 100% this year. The 50-yarder was interesting. That was the first 50-yard kick an Oregon kickers made in 16 seasons. So, and it was a guy who he had not played. He'd been on the injury report every game, and then he wasn't on the injury report. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, but it's a backup kicker. Then surely we won't see him. And then he went out and hit a 50-yarder in the third quarter. So what are you gonna do?
Tony, Steve, anything else out of you?
No, I'm good.
I think we hit it. I'm still toying with my pick for the game. What's the line? OSU now like by 4, maybe 3.5 or 4. I don't know. Maybe they win by a touchdown. I don't know. But if I think one of the big keys to me is getting pressure on Gabriel, which is going to be difficult. And you know, they had 2 strip sacks this past week against Michigan or against Iowa. Can they get turnovers? I mean, turnovers are going to be so big in this game, I think, one way or the other. And can Ohio State get those turnovers that they've been getting here the last few weeks? So that would be huge, obviously.
I guess my insight into the result of this game is I think if Ohio State plays an A game, they're going to win. And I think for Oregon to win, they're going to have to play pretty flawlessly and hope Ohio State does make a couple of mistakes. I think if both teams play their A game, I think Ohio State wins by a touchdown or more.
Well, Eric, great stuff out of you as always. Always appreciate you stopping by. Great insight. Let people know what's going on with you this week in regards to podcasts and everything else you've got going on.
Yeah, you can find us over at the Odds and Audibles podcast. I do that with Matt, Jared, and I, and we're going every day this week, basically. Friday is off, and then we'll be at the game Saturday covering that. We've got Dan Lanning speaking to media in about 2 hours. So if you want to see what he has to say on Wednesday, you can come check out duckterritory.com. I will warn Buckeye fans that it probably will be very, very little because these media availabilities last about 3 minutes, and most of his answers are no more than 4 words.
Yeah, we joked that Ryan Day spoke for 31 or 32 minutes yesterday and didn't say a whole heck of a lot. So, there was a little bit of meat in there, but he's even no-selling the idea of traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now, I know Ohio State's not on the East Coast per se, but right now, Big Ten teams, after Michigan lost, they are 1-8, traveling 2 time zones, and the one win was Indiana over UCLA, which is one of the worst teams in college football, UCLA. Yes. So there should be a star by that win for Indiana. But he's completely no-selling the idea that this is going to be an impact. They're not going on Thursday. Back when OSU used to be on semesters and they weren't in class till mid-September, they'd go to the West Coast. Early September, they'd fly out Thursday. Well, they're flying out, Friday morning, 10 o'clock, going to arrive out there mid-afternoon, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock. And just going to treat it, probably do a walkthrough at the hotel is what I was told. And, use the lines in the parking lot as the football lines, I guess. And, go and play the football game at 4:30 on Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time, and fly home and get home at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, I guess, is the plan. So, we'll see if their handling of the time change works out to their favor or not.
Yeah, the weirdness of modern college football in this era, where we have conferences that are dividing time zones, and I should ask, are either of you guys heading out?
Yep, we'll be there.
Awesome.
Flying out Thursday. I've told this story. Southwest somehow added a direct flight. First time in my life I've ever heard of anything like that. Columbus to Portland, and I'm on it. So I've got a 5-hour flight direct into Portland, and looking forward to it.
It doesn't look like Tony's on it.
No, Southwest changed my 9:30 a.m. flight to a 5:20 a.m. flight. So I'm going to be hitting the airport at about 4 a.m. today.
Are you in the B group with noon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I paid for early bird, so I'm thinking I'll be like B1. But, whatever. It's amazing people pay for that and they get on the plane and they sit in the first few rows. And I'm like, that exit row is where everybody wants to be. If you guys don't want it, I'll sit there. That's fine. I'll even take that bastard seat, the 2 seats and then the doors right there.
Yeah.
I'll even take that bastard seat, the second one closest to the door, because at least you could put your feet sideways and you have a little bit extra leg room. But, I'm hoping to get the big one. I'm hoping to get one of the 2 big ones right by the door where I've got 8 feet of leg room. That would be great.
Well, enjoy your guys' travel, and we'll have to say hi up in the press box.
Oh, I can't wait to get there. Never been there. Looking forward to it. They say it's a big deal.
It's a great spot. It's a smaller press box. They're going to put people on the roof. I don't know if you guys heard that or not, but
we did. That is. Is it safe? Also, how is the parking? Because I was told I'm not getting a parking pass.
Okay. The roof thing is new. I've never, as far as I know, they've never done this before.
Fantastic.
So there's basic for I guess for listeners, they don't care, but for you two as much. there's probably room for about 100 people in the press box, and then there's spillover. They're putting 20 people on the roof. I hope you guys aren't on the roof. I have not been on the roof. It's where they usually put the college radio guys who are basically getting their early reps.
Mhm.
And every time I see them, it's usually been in like November. They're just freezing. They've got hand warmers. They're not having a good time. I'm going to guess you guys aren't going to be up on the roof though. Parking. So what was your plan going to be?
Well,
Yeah,
I'm going to beg for a parking pass, but they just said,
Yeah.
you can find parking around for like $50 around town. It's like, oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, if you're going to do that, I would probably park over by, well, I could text you the details.
Yeah.
To just go through all of this. But yeah, there's a couple of solutions that would work. I would definitely try to get parking. That's going to make your life a lot easier. But I do know they're really short on that. We usually have we have less parking passes this week, I should say, than we normally do, because they're trying to redistribute that. I was told this is like
odds in the 40s are coming. That's when you know it's a big freaking deal, baby.
I know.
We had
It's just,
40 last week. I'm sure
gosh.
we're getting Todd 40, Stewie Mandel, and Ari Wasserman, and whoever else. I'm sure we're getting the heavy hitters, Staples, and
it's going to be everybody.
You name them, they'll be there.
2 versus 3, we deserve it, right?
That's right.
All right, everyone. Heavy hitter down here. Check out Eric's work. It's right there on the banner. You can follow him on X. Eric, appreciate you being here so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Eric.
Enjoy the game.
Of course. See you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff. Great preview out of Eric today.
I'm thinking 28-20 is kind of what I was thinking about OSU, and I'll percolate that for another day. I did watch the Boise State and the Michigan State games back. I was kind of half watching the UCLA game the night coming back after the Michigan State OSU game. It was on till 2 a.m, and they just went down to the Rose Bowl and just, slapped UCLA around a little bit. So, I'm keyed up. Hey, they're recruiting great players. Ohio State's recruiting great players, and this looks like it's going to be a rivalry in the Big Ten going forward.